Let's continue our discussion of the events of MGSV in this, Part 2, in Central Africa. The Angola-Zaire section of the game begins with episode 13, Pitch Dark. The story throughout this section is dense and winding in a way that seems much more difficult to follow by design. It starts when diamond dogs are used to inadvertently expose a village taken over by the mercenary private force the CFA with a vocal cord parasite. You're led to also accidentally infect your own organization with the same parasite when you extract a certain white child soldier and his band from the same village. This leads you to the old Navajo code talker, who Skullface has used to make possible a form of potential nuclear proliferation that will completely remake the world. And it all comes together, as we'll see in Part 3, when you finally confront Skullface by going back to Afghanistan. The reason this will have to wait is just figuring out how this chain of events is put together in Central Africa is much more complex than it may seem. So let's dive in.
You mentioned something interesting. The reason why they pulled their plug on the operation in Afghanistan. He said their funding started going to Central Africa instead. Cypher is pursuing new research in Africa.
Africa? What research?
Diamond Dogs go to Central Africa because of something Ocelot says Huey says under interrogation. According to Ocelot, Cypher are behind Sahelanthropus, but recently they've diverted funding to a separate secret project. A weapon to surpass Metal Gear with the power to trigger a revolution in military affairs. Now what this actually means will have to wait, but that's supposedly why Skullface had no problem giving Emmerich the axe. The Sahelanthropus project, evidently, is no longer a funding priority. Of course, we later see for ourselves this plainly isn't true. When we face Sahelanthropus again in Afghanistan, it's equipped with a host of new and expensive weapons, like the whip, the railgun, and the radome-like dish, similar to the one used in MGS1 by Metal Gear Rex. It's important to notice when the Phantom Pain changes its story, which it does quite a lot throughout the section, and this is a good example of just that. Huey will eventually also reveal that Sahelanthropus has remained a work in progress, nestled in the Secret Design Bureau OKB-0. But that won't be for a while, specifically after we rescue Code Talker, who provides corrosive archaea, which Ocelot uses to torture Huey into confessing. Before any of that happens, first, we're hired, supposedly by an environmental NGO or non-governmental organization, to stop an oil spill contaminating the Munene River. This entire mission may be, in fact, a nod to the scenario during the plant chapter of Metal Gear Solid 2.
A pipeline that crosses the Munene River failed. Now the shore's a mess.
If the chlorides being used to decontaminate the seawater go up with the oil, toxins containing catastrophic levels of dioxins will be released. In other words, the bay's ecosystem will be wiped out, and the sea will turn into a toxic soup for centuries, becoming the worst environmental disaster in history.
At this time in African affairs, there's a proxy war going on between the Western-backed group in Angola, UNITA, and the Soviet and Cuban-backed group, the MPLA. In the first mission in the area, episode 13, members of UNITA have been absorbed into a South African mercenary force called the CFA, Central Forces of Africa. Now, the reason that South African mercenaries are in Angola is a subject for a different video. But these UNITA members are the ones occupying that village downstream, Wala Yamasa.
Those are United troops, but their gear is from a PF known as the CFA, the Contract Forces of Africa. So the militants hired a PF to strengthen themselves, but the PF got so big it absorbed them. How's that for irony? Children. Child soldiers.
The premise initially is that UNITA, the Western-backed side of the ongoing proxy war in Angola, has hijacked an obsolete oil refinery and accidentally caused a bad oil spill. Because UNITA have been spotted using American weapons, Miller supposedly concludes that they're being covertly backed by Cypher, and so he suspects them of having something to do with their plan to create a weapon to surpass Metal Gear. Very rapidly and disorientingly, this story changes multiple times. First, we learn that, well, technically, UNITA isn't per se involved. Members of UNITA have joined a prominent Mark outfit in the region, the CFA, and they're only actually present downstream from the oil field, at the village Bwala Yamasa.
They're members of UNITA, but those locals have been hired by CFA, the South African PF. Guess they weren't happy with what UNITA was paying them. CFA soldiers. Those guys look different from the rest. Not UNITA. Most likely Afrikaners. The CFA's core personnel are Afrikaners from South Africa. They're highly trained, too. Not the kind of mercs UNITA can afford these days. And they must have been hired by someone with much deeper pockets.
Later, we'll learn the UNITA men may be wearing CFA gear, but in truth they're under the command of a mysterious operative known only as the Gunsmith. Their purpose in the village is to help the Gunsmith train child soldiers, who've been abducted from all over Africa, not by the CFA at all, but by a different PF, ZRS, Zero Risk Security.
As you know, contract forces of Africa were stationed at that village. Anti-government forces hired ZRS to bring kids there from around Africa for training.
The only thing these kids share in common is a language, namely Kikongo. That is why these members of UNITA were hired to begin with, it seems. Because unlike in South Africa, where the CFA are from, where the dominant lingua franca is Afrikaans, in Central Africa, it's Kikongo.
Bika munduki kaka ya kunangula. Talaki sika ntima ya mbeni kele. Mpidina. Ntangu ya ngeme kuma kibeni soda.
That is why the village downstream is populated entirely by Kikongo-speaking men, only informally and on an ad hoc basis affiliated with the CFA. Though we were told UNITA are the ones who've taken over the oil relay station, we find there, to the contrary, only members of the PF, the CFA. And by the mission's end, we learn that the CFA didn't take over the facility at all. To the contrary, they were hired to guard it by its owner, a company called Saner, South African Natural Resources, a company that we'll discuss in more detail very soon. Yet soon, even this gets exposed as being a front story in more ways than one.
The relay station from Fenda oil field. They've cranked up the old machinery despite it being much too decrepit to run. That led to the oil spill, which is contaminating the river. On the surface, the oil field takeover makes them look like victims, but that's just what we're supposed to think. Saner drills oil wells wherever they can throughout that region. And when the oil dries up, they abandon the facility. Then it's only a matter of time before the aging equipment starts leaking crude. That means UNITA's takeover is the perfect cover for Saner. Now they can blame the spill on a bunch of oil thieves. To top it off, 3 years ago Saner was the recipient of an unusually large boost in capital. Most of it coming from an American venture capital fund. We took another look into Saner, the owner of the oil field. They were behind what happened. They hired the PF, not UNITA. They restarted the facility all the while pretending they were the victims. One other thing. Saner's Johannesburg head office is just a room in a multi-tenant building. Company's essentially non-existent. 3 years ago, that investment fund stepped in and started gutting it through a series of mergers and sell-offs. And get this, the fund itself no longer exists either. It's a shell corporation, meaning someone is just using Saner's name from the shadows.
Now, Snake is given 2 tasks in this episode to stop the spread of petropollution into the village's water supply, destroy the oily water separator tank, and shut down the oil transfer pump. It's pitched as a humanitarian and environmentalist mission, which of course obfuscates the fact that the actual villagers have all been ran out and that the village is now currently occupied by the CFA. Secretly, Sator has paid the CFA to restart the refinery. This, we later learn, was most likely the action of none other than Skullface. You see, Skullface conducted a 3rd parasite test shortly before you arrived, this time on Kikongo speakers, using a village adjacent to the oil refinery. This was to test the parasite's transmission speed, but it very nearly got out of control. XOF had to burn the entire village down, and it's safe to assume that this accounts for the smoke that we see in the start of the mission throughout the region. My theory is that these other smoke plumes are real oil fires. After all, what better place to hide a needle than a stack of needles? The village's proximity to the relay station upstream meant it was already going to be covered in oil. The cleanup operation used for its cover the premise of an oil fire.
Who would wonder if one day they caught fire? And so it did. They burned it all, living and dead.
But this fire was not enough. We're later told that the bodies of some of these victims of the parasite got waterlogged, which explains why Skullface, who was trying to prevent the parasites from spreading downriver into Waligamasa, hired the CFA to restart the facility and intentionally cause the oil leak. The corpses were then pushed beneath the wastewater and the oil within Mfinda's oily water separator. The transfer pump was transferring the oil into the Munene River to prevent anyone downstream from drinking it. But by completing this mission, 2 things result. You find walker gears have made an appearance in Central Africa, and things get set into motion for both the pathogen that will later spread at Mother Base and the arrival of Eli, aka Liquid Snake, who will play a very central role in the defeat of Skullface. But that will all have to wait. Next, we have the mission Lingua Franca. This introduces the concept of a lingua franca, or a language of languages that 2 groups speak to be on the same page, by way of the English Afrikaans interpreter. Within the CFA, it turns out, are not only Angolans, like members of UNITA, and South Africans, but also British personnel. One of these British people, known as the Viscount, has tried to unilaterally swap the CFA's loyalty from UNITA to the MPLA in order to get his own greedy hands on the MPLA's oil field rights. The Viscount is actually one of the CFA's founding members, and he's secretly also the one who commissions his own rescue operation.
There's a violent power struggle going on within the Contract Forces of Africa, the PF that ran security for the Mfinda oil field. Most of their key people are Afrikaners, but naturally for a South African organization, some of its founders are British.
That's the rescue target known as the Viscount. But don't let that fool you. He's no aristocrat. He started out in the British Army's Scots Guards, moved on to the SAS, then became a mercenary and helped create the CFA. He was planning to secure the MPLA's oil field rights for himself in exchange for swapping the CFA's alliance from the anti-government UNITA rebels to the state-backed MPLA. He hid this from the Afrikaners, but once he thought the jig was up, he tried to pin it on the other British personnel and take off. The Afrikaners captured him, and that was when he asked us to rescue him, and only him.
Though there's a lot of thematic and historical commentary in this episode, story-wise, the main point seems to be that the Viscount reveals the private forces in the region are being supplied with walker gears. The next mission, Footprints of Phantoms, is a follow-up on this intel about the walker gears. Diamond Dogs is so interested in the walker gears because we saw for ourselves that they were developed ostensibly for the Soviet Union by Huey in Afghanistan. The question of what these are doing in the hands of Western-backed PFs in Central Africa is the central question at the start of this Angola-Zaire section. One interesting detail is that our actual client for Footprints of Phantoms is the MPLA, the same socialist Angolan government who also hired Diamond Dogs in episodes 21 and 23. But just as we never worked for the Soviets in Afghanistan, we'll never work for the Western-backed group UNITA in Central Africa. The closest we ever get is working for the UNITA-aligned Mbele rebels in episodes 18, 25, and 26, and for presumably Western NGOs in episodes 13, 24, and apparently also 26. We'll discuss that soon. We also work for an NGO as we build our conservation platform on Mother Base. And as we'll see, these NGOs are likely clues to the involvement of Cypher. It seems that all three major PFs in the region, the CFA, Rogue Coyote, and Zero Risk Security, all of them by the way being South African, have a gentleman's agreement around the shared responsibilities of guarding and operating a vital supply network that's based around the CFA-dominated Nova Braga Airport.
Nova Braga Airport is the CFA's most critical outpost along the border. By the way, boss, we got some interesting news out of our friend the Viscount. He mentioned that more than a few PFs in the region have purchased walker gears. The CFA's the same. Once you'd eliminated those walker gears, a resupply call was made from Ditadi to CFA headquarters. The CFA then contacted none other than Saner. That's right, the shell company that owned Mfinda oil field. The resupply won't be happening just yet, but we did learn that the walker gears are transported out of Nova Braga Airport.
Boss, about those walker gears deployed by the CFA. PFs all along the Angola-Zaire border are also getting equipped with them.
Ons het al die ruimte hier wat ons nodig het.
Waarvoor het meneer sulke groot hangers nodig? Is dit nie hoogtyd dat ek weet nie?
Sekerlik, kom nie. Jy en jou manne sal 'n deurslaggewende rol speel vir die volgende fase.
Given none of the three South African PFs could operate here without the airfield, it's implied that Sater and the CFA are the linchpins to all three. Again and again, we run into property that seems to be owned by Sater, who clearly own both the land of the Ditadi abandoned village as well as the Nova Braga airfield. Yet Sater itself is a front company, we're told, funded by an American venture capital fund that no longer exists. Strangely, just like with the oil field, Sater have resumed operations in the Nova Braga airport, another decrepit facility. Nova Braga clearly hasn't been active since the Second World War, yet now it's apparently being used kind of like Strut E on the Big Shell from Metal Gear Solid 2, the heliport and parcel room. Supplies, in other words, are being flown in and then distributed from here along a kind of nodal network. This apparently includes walker gears. Nova Braga is full of tourism ads, but likely those are just a front. After all, this is a war zone. There's a distribution network on the Savannah, used by all three PFs to move compensation for their services back to South Africa, in the form of locally mined natural resources. There's a heavily guarded convoy that moves throughout the region regularly, which cause suspects may be collecting diamonds and valuable natural resources from the PFs in exchange for walker gears. The PF in charge, the CFA, we later find out is also using the same route to supply UNITA with weapons. However, Kaz also thinks that the heavy guard detail implies something else is being transported along this convoy as well, that Cypher must be using the region as a haven for secretly moving something related to their weapon-to-surpass Metal Gear. In the episode Traitor's Caravan, you have to extract the covered vehicle in the caravan before it reaches the dock next to the burned village outside Mfinda. But for a third time, waiting to ambush you are, of course, the skulls. Along the way, you can overhear crucial foreshadowing about mercs disappearing recently in a certain forest.
Weet nie. Maar het jy al die gerug gehoor? Daar's 'n boot Zaire grens. Blykbaar vol spooke. En enige iemand
wat ooit daarin gaan, kom nooit uit nie.
So jy weet daarvan.
It turns out that the convoy in Traitor's Caravan seems to be attempting to ship yellowcake and malachite to South Africa.
Boss, we searched the truck you recovered. There were two primary types of cargo. First, drums of malachite, a copper ore. That took up most of the truck bed. But malachite isn't valuable enough to warrant an escort. The real cargo was likely the second item, a shielding container. The contents, yellowcake. That's right, the raw material for a nuclear weapon.
The analysis of that malachite has come back first. Naturally, the main compound is copper. There's also a small amount of cobalt. Nothing unusual so far. Southern Zaire is a well-known copper belt. However, in addition to these, we also detected a trace amount of uranium. The content percentage, though, is too low for nuclear development. Where were they transporting the yellowcake and malachite uranium? The first place that comes to mind is South Africa. The government was supposed to have abandoned nuclear weapons development after caving to international pressure. But rumors persist that it's continued in secret.
Diamond Dogs discovers within the yellowcake is a thin layer of enriched uranium, as well as the presence of trace amounts of the stuff within the malachite. The uranium in the malachite, however, is unenriched. Because uranium can't be enriched naturally, this points to the possibility of covert nuclear weapons development in the region. Diamond Dogs also finds impurities in both the yellowcake and malachite, which, due to their different compositions, point to two separate sources for them. We're told the source for the malachite's traces of unenriched uranium was likely Shinkolobwe Mine in Zaire. Supposedly, this abandoned mine, once infamously used to provide the high-yield uranium that was used in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, has been restarted by ZRS.
The mine's closed, as all the high-purity uranium ore dried up a long time ago, but you could probably still find it there in small quantities. Just hearing its name is like seeing all the phantoms of the war rise up to haunt us. But all the uranium's dried up, and the mine's been closed for years.
So someone reopened it.
Right. Zero-risk security seized control of the area and were forcing locals to work in it. And the Zairean government was getting a slice of what they took in exchange for looking the other way. Butu has to finance his taste somehow. He'll gladly sell the rights to some old mine.
That's yet another case of a decrepit facility brought back to life, not unlike how Big Boss has returned after 9 years on ice. Given that ZRS are headquartered in the same South African city as Zaire, Johannesburg, it's possible that Zaire is behind ZRS or linked to ZRS. By mining the malachite laden with trace amounts of unenriched uranium, it seems Cypher or Skullface are using a transportation method that's capable of avoiding all detection. But the question at this stage, after Traitor's Caravan, is how will the raw uranium traces that was in the convoy get enriched with the same discretion? An enrichment plant isn't nearly as easy to hide and would be a major international scandal. It's clear some method of clandestine uranium enrichment is already available, made obvious by the very presence of the enriched layer inside the yellowcake. But what are the details? Well, we won't find the answer until Code Talker much later tells us about his so-called uranium-enriching archaea. The real cargo during Traitor's Caravan, you see, isn't the yellowcake or the malachite themselves. It's the material that Diamond Dogs takes to be impurities. These impurities are actually microbes that, when triggered, organically enrich the uranium without any need for a facility to do so. This has the power, you see, to democratize nukes for anyone in the world to develop and use. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. When the caravan reaches Kaziba camp, the CFA nearly insist on checking the cargo because the Kikongo strain has begun ravaging their personnel in Walyamasa, and now some of them don't know who to trust.
Stop it! Jy ken die reëls. Lig daai seil op en my kliënt gaan bedonderd raak.
Dink jy ek gee hel om?
Ons het 'n ooreenkoms. Jy sal aangekla word van kontrakbreuk.
Sê vir jou baas, hy moet die rekening stuur.
What the hell, man?
As 'n aansteeklike siekte om die buitepos. Stroom af. Is waarskynlik dat dit deur 'n ander permanente mag losgelaat is.
En jy blameer die FSA.
Ek het dit nooit gesê. Maar op die oomblik is almal bietjie lig geraak oor buitestanders. Net een kyk en ons kan alles oplos.
Ek gaan nie die verantwoordelikheid hiervoor vat nie.
Dit is CP. Laat die konvooi deur. Akka het ons geskakel. Die boodskap is: ons het 'n gesamentlike verhouding met zero risiko sekuriteit in hierdie saak. Eensidige optrede in die gebied sal nie geduld word nie. Eensidige optrede sal nie geduld word nie. Dit is Akka se bevel. Ons het geen ander keuse nie.
That comes to a head in the next episode, Rescue the Intel Agents. To investigate what's going on with the CFA, Diamond Dogs has dispatched 2 spies to infiltrate their ranks. Both are discovered, and when they are, the CFA, in search of an enemy to blame for that mysterious pathogen, blame Diamond Dogs. It's here you're first shown what the vocal cord parasites can do, which allows you to connect some dots back to those bodies that you saw floating in Muffinda oil field. One point Rescue the Intel agents makes clear is that someone has clearly been spreading the word on what should have remained secret, that Diamond Dogs and Big Boss were the ones behind the Muffinda oil field bombing. Who would do this and why? Well, we'll try to explain this the best we can in the next episode, when we sum everything up before moving forward. Next, in On the Trail, you're contracted to kill the commander of Rogue Coyote, known as the Major. Much like Major Zero. He sent someone undercover within the CFA to investigate what's killing off their men, exactly as Diamond Dogs did in the previous mission. His inside man reports the CFA don't know, but that rumors persist that Rogue Coyote avoided the job for Traitor because they knew about the epidemic in advance. The Major has been spreading rumors about nuclear weapons trading in the region, as well as the idea that ZRS, Zero Risk Security, have been contracted to kill some old men.
Sien die res in 'n geskrewe verslag. Wat meer belangrik is jou volgende taak. ZRS probeer 'n ou man om die lewe bring. Dit het iets te doen met Caravan. Maar ek het geen idee wie die ou man is nie.
Ek verstaan. Ek sal dit ondersoek. Kernwapens te ondersoek is, wel, dis 'n baie gevaarlike pad om te loop.
Ek weet nie. Kan wees wat hierdie plek nodig het. Jy skrik maak tussen die lande. Baie bloedvergieting staan.
This character is also discussed by CFA guards, who say he's a nuclear weapons genius and his research is going to put nukes in the hands of even the smallest countries and militant groups. But we won't get to meet him for a while. Crucially, in On the Trail, we're never told who hires us to take out the Major. It's implied to come from a rival PF, but I think that this may be just a ruse. The real purpose seems to be ensuring that we overhear the Major discussing ZRS, Code Talker, and nukes. As we'll cover next time, nearly all of this intel may in fact be fake.
Speak. Talk. Speak. Talk.
As Diamond Dogs tries to figure out what exactly was in that convoy truck that you've extracted, we gradually move from missions targeting the CFA to those targeting Rogue Coyote. Rogue Coyote are in charge of Bampeve Plantation and Kunganga Mine. This is also the same region where an ethnic conflict has been going on for decades between the Butu and the Mbele tribes. Now this is somewhat confusing, but there's a civil war within a civil war here. What I mean is that in addition to UNITA versus the MPLA in Angola, we have also the Mbele versus the Butu, two ethnic groups that have been torn apart by foreign powers ever since World War I.
Hoorie, het jy dit geweet? Oor die mense in die gebied wat in twee etniese groeperings verdeel is?
Ja, die Mbele ondersteun die rebelle, die Butu is aan die kant van die regering.
There are 6 targets. They're soldiers. The contract is to kill them all. They used to be with a platoon of Mbele rebels, but then the Butu authorities captured them.
Our contract is to kill them all. And the client is the general they served under. He wants them dead to keep them from talking.
Even though we're told that this mission, Blood Runs Deep, comes from a top-ranking Mbele general, later events throughout this passage of the game suggest that this general may already in fact be dead, and like Traitor, like Big Boss, like a shell corporation, that somebody's just using his name after death or incapacitation from the shadows. After all, Blood Runs Deep is one of the most apparently deceptive missions thus far. We're told details about both the client and the job that seem to become subverted or challenged by the episode's end. This Mbele general supposedly wants 6 of his former soldiers who have fallen into enemy hands silenced, though whether this enemy is the MPLA, the Butu, or just the PF Rogue Coyote is never really made clear. We're initially told their leader is this adult who Kaz claims betrayed his former comrades to start working for the local PF, Rogue Coyote.
That's one of them. He was the platoon leader. Then he turned his back on the others and joined up with the local PF. Now he's part of the security detail at the Bampeve plantation. He's not so different from the general. They get plenty worked up for rebellion and revenge, but don't give a damn about their own men.
And we're also told that the 5 others are being forced to labor in the Kunganga mine while they aren't being interrogated, as a deliberate reference, perhaps, to the events of Ground Zeroes. But when we interrogate the 6th former Mbele, who's left the Mbele to become a member of Rogue Coyote, he says that he's joined the PF in exchange for the lives of the other 5. That would mean they're not being held for interrogation at all.
Is that the target?
Spit it out.
It sounds like all 6 were targeted by Rogue Coyote on behalf of the Butu, and that the PF saw more profit in letting the 5 child soldiers live to work as basically slaves than killing them. The Rogue Coyote commander mentioned something along these lines in On the Trail, when he mentioned human trafficking has been going on beneath the CFA's notice. It seems like the same thing has been going on under his notice too.
Van alle dinge, en ek maak soms my hande vuil. Maar ek's 'n engel in vergelyking met sommige van hierdie bliksems. Slawe aan, reg onder hulle neuse en hulle wil my vervolg.
Maar ek's nie 'n voortrekker, maar jy's heeltemal reg. Nie een van ons verdien 'n prys op sy kom.
And by the mission's end, we apparently pretend to kill the 5 by falsifying a tape, only to actually rescue them and take them back to Mother Base, which begins a fascination that will last for the rest of the Phantom Pain with the very question of what's known as child soldiers. Now, in the real Angola Civil War, the MPLA funded itself through oil, which is something that we saw in an earlier mission hinted at, and UNITA, who were backed by the CIA, funded their aspect of the war through diamonds. Considering this is a diamond mine, and given that we're told that the Butu are backing the MPLA and the Mbele are backing UNITA, and it's hinted that the PFs in the region are all also backing UNITA, if it's true that Rogue Coyote were contracted to kill the Mbele children, as I intimated as a theory, that would mean that Rogue Coyote have worked for both sides of this civil war within a civil war. The point is that for mercenaries, everything is just about business. There's no loyalty, it doesn't really matter, it's just about the highest bidder. If it's more profitable to work for the MPLA, even if it's just for a mission or two, then a PF will do that. And this speaks to the wider theme of how the world that we saw in MGS3 becomes the war economy-based world that we find in MGS4 through the missing link that is MGSV.
I was made to fight. I am a gun.
Behold! Today is the day weapons learn to walk upright!
What you thinking, boss?
I'm thinking that he's tougher than he looks. With a little training, he'll make himself useful.
All of these children are orphans. They work in arms factories. And when they grow up, they want to join a PMC. They seek revenge on other companies, PMCs that killed their parents, and use their earnings to support their younger siblings.
You rescue the 5 children, which leads directly to the next episode, Voices. Oh so conveniently, a few days before Diamond Dogs received the contract for the events of the prior mission, there was apparently a 6th Mbele child, their leader, Shabani, who got transported for unknown reasons to a place called Nzoia Badia Bulu.
The target is Shabani. He was the leader of the boys being forced to work at the mine. He was separated from the others and taken away to Ngumba Industrial Zone. The locals call this place Nzoia Badia Bulu, the Devil's House. Shabani was the oldest among the kids. He looked after them, and apparently they really admired him. We don't know why Shabani was moved to Nzoia Badia Bulu. The client has no idea either. It's not much, but he says Shabani lost his singing voice. Meaning, his voice started to break. That gives us an idea of his age.
It's implied that Nzo Ya Badiabalu is the first location that we're visiting in any mission yet that's in Zaire. It was built with the goal of turning Zaire into an industrialized modern state, but had to be abandoned when that dream did not become a reality. Yet again, Sater is involved. Supposedly, they are the ones who bought the place and restarted some sort of industrial activity there. So this time, instead of hiring the CFA, they've hired Rogue Coyote. Well, it seems that this activity has been using slaves as research experiments, somewhat similar to the Holocaust, I suppose. Both black Africans and white mercenaries appear to have been used in this devil's house to breed strains of parasite that react to varying languages, exposed to them by shoving an earpiece down the subject's throat. In both Blood Runs Deep and Voices, we find more burning corpses, just like we did back during Pitch Dark in the village upstream.
Whatever happened, all the bodies are completely carbonized.
Intel on this, at least some intel on this, you obtain in Voices by following a new transporter to the region, working for Rogue Coyote. He more or less reveals he's the replacement for the last driver, who went into the tunnel leading into Ngamba, saw the subjects being experimented on there, and tried to free them by sneaking them out in his truck.
Donderdag is buite perk. Moenie daar aangaan nie.
Is daar iets spesiaal aan die ander kant?
Nie nuuskierig raak nie. Jy soos die ander bestuurder op my dag.
Daar het iets met hom gebeur.
Hy het deur die ton gegaan en die fabriek aan die ander kant gesien. Toe sy gewete seker nie oor want hy probeer om die mense te bevry. Daai tydstip was ek aan diens by die stasie en ek het die trok gestop. Ek het nie geweet wat om te doen nie. Dit rapporteer aan bevel voor ek geweet het wat aangaan. Die span opgedrag net daar en dan geskiet. Verbrandde die hele vrachtwagen met almal binne in en alles was weg.
This other guard stopped them and called Rogue Coyote Command, who in turn contacted XOF, who promptly showed up, shot the driver, and burned the truck and all the subjects in it. This heavily implies that XOF, Skullface, and/or Sater are intimately involved not only with ZRS and the CFA, but also Rogue Coyote.
The client is one of the kids you rescued from that mine. According to the kids, people often disappear from the mine to a place called Nzoyabadiabulo, the Devil's House. On top of that, Sater's involved with the place. Check your iDroid for the mission details.
The client for Voices are the other Mbele child soldiers that we rescued the mission prior. Could that mission have been given to Diamond Dogs purely to set the stage for us to discover the going-ons in the Devil's House? I think so. What's also strongly hinted at here is that the corpses that we see burning in Kangenga Mine and at Monoko Ya Nyoka Station are likely subjects and/or witnesses to what's going on at the Devil's House.
According to the client, it wasn't just Shabani that was taken there. The adults were rounded up as well. That would explain why the only adults in the mine were PF soldiers.
It even seems that the bridge here was destroyed to prevent any future such escape attempts. Later, in the episode Close Contact, we'll actually get to meet two of the specialists who were used to set up the so-called Devil's House. Voices establishes links between Skullface, the third boy, and the Man on Fire, but it's the next episode, The War Economy, that explicitly connects Skullface with Sater. Just as Blood Runs Deep lied about the children, the War Economy lies about the premises of its meeting between the CFA and the civilian operative. The CFA merc thinks that he's meeting the president of Sater, the man that we're told at the start of the mission is some sort of arms dealer. Similarly to the Rogue Coyote commander in On the Trail, this fake has been apparently paid to spread rumors about nuclear weapons.
Jy en jou manne sal 'n deurslaggewende rol speel vir die volgende fase. Ons gaan die lughawe gebruik as afsetpunt vir die verkoop van nukes.
Verkoop van nukes? Jy's
Dis wat ons doen. Natuurlik is die verspreiding van kernwapens 'n kopsie. Maar wat as jy 'n atoombom op enige plek kan bou sonder spesialisfasiliteite, sonder hoëgraad uraan? Dis die nuwe sakemodel. Dink net aan die markandeel wat ons kan betrek.
Meneer is nie ernstig nie.
Ek is altyd ernstig. Jou verkoopsroetes gaan onvervangbaar wees. En om te dink, as jy nie 'n nukes het, sal die MPLA ook wil kry. Betaling sal uiteindelik groter mynregte wees en dies meer.
Spit it out. Speak. Speak.
He may as well be an actor. But the actual details that he provides are consistent with the material that was being transported in Traitor's Caravan. We're also given yet another bit of insight into what's happening in Yamasa. Apparently, the members of UNITA who had occupied the village were being led by the gunsmith, maybe the one that you extract during a side op. That gunsmith was responsible for training the child soldiers who now occupy the village in UNITA's stead. That leads to the next episode, the White Mamba. After all the adults in Yamasa died following Pitch Dark, thanks to Diamond Dogs, mysteriously the White Mamba has shown up. He's become the new leader of the child soldiers, as we see in this mission. It's strongly suggested that Eli has already been told that his father is Big Boss and that he was abandoned by him. That's why it seems Eli already holds a grudge, which we can see from the signs that are all over the village that say "kill the pig" and this idea of Pig Boss. If we look carefully at Yamasa in the White Mamba episode, we can also spot, not only right in front of Eli's throne, but all over the place, severed pig heads, many of them on sticks. Clearly, deprived of his true target for revenge, Big Boss, Eli has taken his rage out on swine. Later on, Eli's lust for revenge will lead to Skullface's demise when the third boy is drawn into symbiosis with him. This is actually foreshadowed in Voices when Mantis momentarily bonds with Shabani as the boy is dying. The two engineers that you rescue during Close Contact, the next mission, provide a ton of intel on the Devil's House. Most importantly of all, that the only language missing there was English. The American technician was brought in to transport and set up medical equipment there, as well as examine the new facility's patients. To show him around, the NGO who set up the Devil's House also hired for him an assistant, and together they were the only ones on the team who spoke English. In Close Contact, it's subtly revealed that whoever set up the Devil's House did so through an NGO, specifically through an international health organization. And by hiring these two English speakers, it was a guarantee, once Diamond Dogs is hired to rescue them, that we would learn English wasn't present on any of the tapes. They are the only ones who could confirm that for sure. Next comes Aim True Ye Vengeful. Supposedly you receive a new assignment by the same Mbele general who thinks you killed those child soldiers in the mine during Blood Runs Deep. Now, according to a ZRS soldier in Lafwa Valley, the Mbele are aligned with UNITA and the Butu with the MPLA. So technically, this general may be involved with Cypher given their support for UNITA. Or should I say, was involved. It turns out the former XO that you've been sent to rescue isn't the general's brother at all, but actually, ironically, his murderer. The child revolt took him to try and lure the general out, unaware that the general has already been killed. And the XO hasn't corrected them because then they'd probably kill him. This is when the epidemic starts to spread in Mother Base, thanks supposedly to parasite larvae left on the White Mamba unit's clothes. This gives you no choice but track down and rescue Code Talker, in order to save Diamond Dogs. First, there's Hunting Down, which continues off the ongoing storyline involving the Butu and Mbele.
He's a logistics officer for the PF known as Rogue Coyote. On the side, however, he colluded with the Butu regime, abducting people from Mbele villages and supplying them as slave labor. That's right. He's a human trafficker. His victims ended up all over the place. Brothels, black market, organ trade, diamond mines. And he was the one who sent Shabani and the other kids to the Devil's House.
The Rogue Coyote member helped the Butus, who are MPLA aligned, abduct Mbele's for slave labor. Now we're initially told that we've been hired to kill this human trafficker by a Mbele rebel group, who are aligned with UNITA. In Hunting Down, at first we're told our client is another Mbele unit, this time one out for revenge against the human trafficker.
But then an Mbele rebel group finally added him to their hit list.
but the end debriefing totally changes the story should we extract the Rogue Coyote man alive. Then we're told that he himself requested rescue from an NGO, who suddenly it's implied are the actual ones who hired us. The PF trafficker also tells us, according to Ocelot, something cryptic, that the specimens came from deep in the forest. I think this means that's where the actual parasites used at the Devil's House originate from. In other words, Code Talker's mansion. And finally comes Root Cause, which is one of the most deceptive episodes in the entire game.
Boss, the intel team's hard at work investigating the cause of that illness spreading through Mother Base. Problem is, a bunch of our agents in the field are still MIA. Progress has been slow, until now. We just got a distress call from one of them.
The problem is, our man has been captured by the PF in his operation area. He's being held at the guard post on the western end of the mine. Boss, we need you to get him out ASAP. Right now, he's our only link to the root cause of the epidemic. That's the house where the target is being held. They must be interrogating him there. If he lets slip that the intel he has is related to Cypher, it's only a matter of time before they come to eliminate him. The fate of Diamond Dogs is resting on that one man.
We have to rescue an intel team member who's supposedly barely just escaped from CRS capture alive, only to be recaptured by Rogue Coyote. This intel team member is strongly implied to have been infected with a parasite by Code Talker, which leads Diamond Dog straight to his rescue.
Enemy presence detected. The map has... updated.
Boss, cover his escape, then extract him once the coast is clear.
The map has been updated.
I know.
Enemy presence detected. The map has been updated.
Code Talker. They have the mansion surrounded. The old man will die if you find him.
Analysis complete.
Our other men got me out of that mansion. Acted as human shields. Told me, get this intel to the boss. They have them now. Somewhere.
I say the intel team member seems to have been infected with the parasite because not only of the evidence of zombie-like behavior, but also because of how strangely he moves and acts in this mission. If you don't rush over right away, he'll hijack a truck and wreck it, preventing you from even speaking to him directly. There's also his dubious account of the other intel member's fate, which we'll discuss next time.
Boss, the intel team member you extracted is gonna be okay. All thanks to your quick actions. He keeps muttering the same things over and over, about the pathogen, and the old man who knows how to treat it. Code Talker. He even told us where he is. This is our only lead, boss. Let's go meet this Code Talker.
Now there's a lot to unpack about this section that will just have to wait. But let's finish this episode by summarizing some of these events thus far, and connecting at least a few of their dots. Diamond Dogs uncover two networks. One that launders shipments of uranium-enriching archaea inside the PF's raw materials distribution system. The other, one that launders the supply of human hosts for parasitic cultivation in the Devil's House inside the underground slave trade. But more on this will have to wait. What will also have to wait is how Huey appears throughout this section to be Ocelot and Cause's mouthpiece, and also how Quiet seemingly can identify infected subjects on sight, and how she tries to save Diamond Dogs from the Kakongo strain. We'll also discuss my overarching grand theory, if you will, of Cypher's secret civil war, and finally, how much Big Boss and Miller's repressed memories seem to be coloring nearly every mission with rich shades of irony. We'll cover all of this and more, including of course the missions with Code Talker, Skullface, and the final so-called Truth mission in Part 3 of What Happens in MGSV. Until next time, boss.